Hi, everybody. This is Mrs. Stern, and today's screencast is all about seeds to help you understand what seeds are, where they come from, and what they need in order to sprout and grow. So, this should really connect with the online lab you guys did yesterday and help you understand a little bit more about the results that you got. So first of all, if you think about where seeds come from, and that question that was on the previous slide, you might immediately think of fruits because you might think of something like a watermelon or a kiwi or even an orange having seeds inside of it. And so fruits are really one of the places that seeds come from. They're kind of the main place seeds come from. Seeds are contained within fruits. The purpose of fruits is to disperse seeds. And I do want you to think a little bit more broadly about what a fruit is, because you may have heard before, for example, that a tomato is a fruit, which it is because it has seeds inside of it. Pea pods are also fruits, and bell peppers. There's other things that we think of in our kitchen and in our food as being vegetables that are truly fruits. And you'll learn a little bit more about how plants develop fruits next week. If you think more broadly about wild plants, fruits aren't always colorful like this or appetizing. Something like a burr on a plant that might stick to your sock if you go hiking through the woods, or stick to your dog. That's a fruit, and its purpose is to disperse seeds. It sticks to an animal's fur or sticks onto your shoe, and then you carry it somewhere, and then the seed gets planted. Those little spinner things from maple trees, the things that blow off of dandelions, those are also fruits. They disperse seeds through the wind. So fruits are more diverse than what you might normally think of, but they have seeds inside of them, and their purpose is to spread those seeds so that the seeds can grow into new plants. Cones also contain and disperse seeds. Plants that have cones, like pine trees and spruce trees, are much less diverse than plants with fruits. There are many, many, many more species of fruited plants, which are what we consider flowering plants, than there are plants with cones. But those are another structure that plants have for dispersing seeds. So let's next talk about the anatomy of seeds and what's actually inside of a seed. So you should draw a picture like this in your notes so that you can label it and know what the main parts are. There's really three main parts to a seed. First of all is the embryo. Just like you might think of with a human or other animal, an embryo is a baby, basically a small baby in the beginning of its development. Plants reproduce sexually, and so that's something else you'll learn about next week too, is how sexual reproduction works in plants. But this baby plant has been formed from a sperm meeting an egg, and it's now ready to start growing through mitosis. Most of a seed is filled with food, basically, and we call that the food store because it's stored food for this embryo plant. It's kind of similar to the yolk in a bird egg, but it's made of starch, which are also a type of polysaccharide. In some seeds, we call the food store an endosperm, and in some seeds, we call it the cotyledon. It depends on the type of seed that it is. But either way, the purpose of that structure is to store starch. And because starch is a polysaccharide, it can be broken down into glucose, which then the embryo can use for energy through cellular respiration. So if you look at this picture on the right, you can see starch being broken down into smaller and smaller carbohydrate chains, ultimately into glucose. And then lastly, the seed has protection around it called a seed coat. This is made of fiber. And so when you think about sources of fiber in our diet, a lot of times that's related to eating seeds. Like we think of, whole grain bread having more fiber in it. That's because if something is considered whole grain, that means it's been made with seeds like from, wheat or oats or corn, where the seed coat was left on. And so the food contains the nutrients from the seed coat. If you eat something like white bread or refined flour, when they make that, they take the seed coat off of the wheat or corn, and then basically you're just eating the starch in your bread or pasta and not eating the seed coat. So that's kind of the distinction between whole grain foods and foods that are not whole grain or are made from refined grains. So if you understand these three parts, we can start to think about how a seed actually sprouts. And that process is called germination, the development of the new plant from the seed. So this diagram kind of shows you the basic idea of germination. One thing to think about is the fact that seeds are essentially dormant. Dormant is a biology term for sleeping. It means that they're not metabolically active, basically, but it comes from the same root word as the word sleeping. You think about words like dormitory, or if you speak a Latin-based language like French, dormir is the verb for sleep in French. So a seed, when it's inside that fruit or it's inside that cone, is not going to start sprouting until certain things happen. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about. I did want to show you a little time-lapse video of germination. So here you can see a bean that's been planted in a clear cup, and you can see from the side. Once that seed gets woken up, the roots start to pop out, and you can see the roots spreading. There's a lot of mitosis that happens at the tip of the roots, and then you can see the shoot coming out. More mitosis happening, so lots and lots of cell division. That's why we need that food storage inside, so that the plant has energy in order to do this. And then now we see leaves starting to come out, and as soon as the leaves are fully developed, then photosynthesis takes over as the main mechanism for feeding that plant. So let's talk a little bit about how the seed, quote unquote, wakes up and how it starts to germinate. You experienced some of the factors that affect germination in the lab activity you did yesterday, one of which was water. Some of you may have chosen to test water as a variable affecting germination. And in most plant species, water is the main signal that triggers germination. So if the seed gets wet, then it will start to germinate. If we were in the classroom in normal life, we would sprout seeds in the classroom, and you can actually sprout like bean seeds just inside a wet paper towel. And you may have done that in elementary school. But yeah, seeds don't really need soil in order to sprout. They do need soil for nutrients eventually once their root system is more well developed, but really they just need to get wet in order to sprout. This is a really important adaptation so that the plant doesn't start to try growing in a situation where it's not going to be good for the plant to grow, because ultimately that plant is going to need water to maintain its hydration levels in its cytoplasm and to perform photosynthesis. So if a seed lands on really dry soil in a drought, or if it lands on a sidewalk, it can last a really long time without sprouting. Some plants do have unique things that they need for germination. For example, some seeds won't germinate until they've passed through a digestive system, because that's kind of an adaptation for ensuring that the seed gets really far away from its parent. But the acid in the stomach will break down the seed coat, and then sometimes there are certain plants where they have to pass through a digestive system and get their seed coat broken down a little bit before they're able to germinate. And then once they get pooped out somewhere far away from their parent, then they sprout. There are also some seeds that need to pass through fire in order to germinate, which is really an adaptation for survival in species where there are lots of natural forest fires, because if a forest fire happens and a lot of trees die, then if fire has triggered all these seeds to germinate, now the forest kind of naturally starts to regenerate itself. Okay, so let's imagine we have a normal seed where it just needs water in order to germinate. If you think about kind of where this plant is headed, eventually it is going to need some light to make food for itself, but it's not going to be able to do that until its leaves form. The plant, again, like I said, doesn't actually necessarily need soil yet. Soil is going to be a source of nutrients and minerals for the plant. Once it has a well-developed root system, it'll be able to absorb those things through the soil. But at this point, when a seed gets wet underground, for most plants, germination naturally begins in the dark. It's not making its own food yet. It's going to use that stored carbohydrates from the food storage for cellular respiration. And so for most plants, they don't need light for germination. There are some species that do, but most don't. And then finally, temperature is another factor that affects germination. And the reason for this is because germination involves lots of biochemical processes that all involve enzymes. And as we learned in the fall, temperature affects enzyme activity. And so temperature has the same effect on germination that it has on enzyme activity because of the enzymes involved in germination. So when you have a really cold temperature, then there's going to be low reaction rates because of the enzymes moving really slow and the substrates moving really slow. If the temperature gets too hot, then that will denature these enzymes and unfold them so they won't be able to function. And so most plants have an optimum temperature where their seeds will germinate best because of the structure of their particular enzymes. So to recap, just see if you can ask yourself these 3 questions that we started with and see if you can answer them. What are seeds? Where do seeds come from? What do they need in order to sprout and grow? If you feel like you can answer those questions, then you have met the goals. And if you don't, you may want to go back and rewatch any parts of the screencast or reach out to your biology teacher for help.